Today I'm going to be sharing the process we used to create this cinematic music video for less than £150. We shot it entirely ourselves with a very small crew and equipment that we already owned. I'll be sharing what worked, what didn't work, and what I learned from the process. And I hope to illustrate how music videos can be such an incredible way to develop your skills and develop as a filmmaker. Since I was very young, I've been making music and films with my brother. Making music and making films has always been our dream, and it's something we started doing as soon as we possibly could. We spent much of our childhood learning how to make films and learning how to play music. And then we spent much of our teenage years making music and playing gigs whenever we could. And along with filmmaking, we'd make music videos to go alongside the songs that we'd created. In the early 2000s, as I was growing up, you still very much had the MTV era, and the music videos you'd see on TV would often be really well made and would be incredibly creative and unique. They weren't just treated as content to put out on one of the many channels. They played a much different role in making a song a success and often had big budgets and great creative ideas and teams behind them. So when I was old enough to start making music videos for our own music, I'd often find myself finding inspiration from the videos that inspired me as a child. I look back very fondly at making music videos as a teenager, and this period of artistic creation ended up really being fundamental for me as an artist and as a filmmaker. It enabled me to experiment and to explore ideas without the long-term commitment that comes with a short or feature film. It was through these projects that I learned to shoot on analog film, I learned to edit, and also really developed as a visual effects artist. I used After Effects a lot to create psychedelic visuals and dream worlds inspired by the music videos that had inspired me as a child. Today I find myself in a very different position where I'm able to make films professionally and work on short and feature projects in a way that I used to dream about. But one thing I've lost is the freedom to just create as and when I wanted to. When I was younger, I had very few responsibilities, and to make a film, I would just pick up a camera and shoot. But most of the projects I work on today require months of planning, preparation, budgeting, and working with a much bigger team. To try and keep my creative spirit and not lose sight of what brought me here, I really wanted to make a music video that would allow me to go back to my roots and just create something with friends for the sake of creating, and ideally doing so with little to no money. And so whilst I had to make this music video alongside other professional commitments, I wanted to use this as a vehicle of exploration and also set a challenge of making the best music video I possibly could for as little money as possible. And I feel like I achieved that mission. So today I wanted to share the process from start to finish of creating this music video for £150. Now this one sounds obvious, but when it comes to making a music video, I think the first and most important step is to take a look at the song and see what it's saying. The song we used is called Control. It was written and recorded by myself and my brother Tom. Tom wrote most of the music and I wrote most of the lyrics. The song is about reckoning with the darkness and dysfunction that can exist within us and explores the need for control in moments that cannot be controlled. The song ended up being quite personal as well and speaking a lot about some mistakes I'd made in relationships in my life at that point. The tones and the production were inspired by the sounds of Phil Spector and Brian Wilson. So we started out with this 60s inspired upbeat sound that then builds into this climax, and then this makes way for a kind of more moody soundscape that takes on a more introspective and reflective tone. Much of this was subconscious, but the end result is a mirror of the crash and the consequences that follow hedonistic living. It starts kind of confident and cocky, and it ends with reflection and sadness over past actions and the consequences that followed. And so inherently we had a lot of emotional weight in the song itself, in the lyrics and in the feel and in the music that we could draw on when it came to planning out this music video. So now that I had themes to work with and the tone of the song informing the tone of the video, I had started to imagine. Initially, I'd listen to the final song with my eyes closed or while on a walk, and I'd just try the best I could to get out of my own way and allow myself to just start dreaming and seeing visuals form naturally. I ended up writing this video several times before I started to find a vision that actually fit, connected with me, and also was logistically possible, given that I knew I'd have to pull this one off virtually with no budget and between multiple active film productions. Initially, I was drawn to the imagery of circuses and started to put together a script and Pinterest board of images that resonated with me and created the feeling that I wanted to transmit through the video. Most of this took place around the imagery of circuses. I started to contact circuses that we could travel to at this time or that we'll be passing through and try and work out what sort of cost this idea would entail. While the quotes I ended up getting were very reasonable, it would cost a lot more than I could spend at the time, and so I went back to the drawing board and started to think of new ideas. This was an instance where once I found the right location, everything else started to come together. One night, while shooting for a YouTube video I was making for the Dehancer plugin, me and my friend Jacob came across a car park that had a floor being renovated. The car park had this amazing view of skyscrapers in the back and was incredibly quiet because no one was parking in there at the time. And in the back there was a rooftop with a great colour palette and this amazing urban backdrop at night. I realised how good this could be as a backdrop to the music video, and so I started to grade the test footage we got that night, and I started to listen to the track and imagine how it would fit together. I knew we wouldn't have long to pull it off, so I decided to put together a small, trusted crew of friends and plan a shoot. We got together and headed to the location. For the shoot, I enlisted the help of my good friend Mark Miko to act as director of photography, Simon Roper and my brother Tom to AD and advise, and then our friend Jacob to drive. We packed a few lenses, a couple of Blackmagic Pocket Cinema cameras, costumes and makeup that I had sorted. Despite moving away from the circus concept, I still loved the clown and mime makeup that I'd seen whilst doing the prep, and loved the way it transformed the face of the performer and allowed a certain freedom to act and move in ways that are easier to attain the more removed you are from yourself. It made me think of David Bowie's Ziggy Stardust, or even the makeup more recently worn by Chapel Rowan that kind of calls back to this. We picked a good time of day to shoot as the sun was going down, and this would also give us a chance to shoot at night, replicating the look of the location during my location scout. We started out by getting some cool slow motion shots of me running. These were shot on a 150mm Sigma photography lens from afar, with the sun-kissed skyline behind me. We then got some shots of me singing and walking towards the camera. We played the track through the car stereo, and Mark popped open the boot of the car, and Jacob drove slowly as I ran behind it, creating the look of a dolly. At this point, I obviously say do not try this at home, as using a car as a dolly is very dangerous. But in our case, we ended up getting some cool, smooth shots that I was happy with and ran everything pretty safely. We ended up getting some cool shots on the top of the rooftop as I walked around. We got as much coverage as we could that night with the time that we had. I knew that not everything that we were shooting would make the grade, but leaving room to experiment and trying things on the day was really helpful. After shooting, that night I returned home and started editing straight away, cutting together a great deal of the video that actually ended up being in the final cut. I started to play around with colour grades until I settled on a look I liked. I was really pleased with how that day's shoot had worked out, and I started to see the gaps that I'd need to fill over the next few shoots, so I started to think about shots that might fill those gaps. Of course, it would have been best to know in advance exactly what we needed and shoot everything back to back, but with limited time and other creative commitments, I was forced to make it piecemeal. At this point in the process, I started to really struggle. I had various ideas for the opening scene and the middle, but each time I'd try and put a shoot together, something wouldn't work out or would go wrong logistically. We entered into this phase where we get together and shoot for various parts of the video that needed doing, but it just wouldn't fit the vision, or it ended up looking too amateur in comparison to what we'd already got. I remember we did this shoot in some woodland that got scrapped. We then did this underwater shoot in a swimming pool that was really fun, but ended up getting scrapped. And then we got some shots of me singing against a big TV screen to mimic the look of vintage back projections. And while this looked really cool, it also got scrapped. It just wasn't quite right for the video. Around that time, I'd started to get involved with a group that dealt with addiction and started to think of the struggles that arise when people stray away from the support system that's helping them. I thought of the chaos in my own life and the ways that I had created these difficult times in my life when turning my back on support systems that had kept me in a healthy place, even if this was to a different degree. I thought back to the movie Fight Club and the strange discomfort in the tragedy of the situations of the people at the addiction support groups, and yet the beauty and comedy that could be found in the companionship there. I wanted to explore this concept and imagery, and so I started to listen to the track again and dream and meditate with that kind of location and idea and concept in mind. So I wrote the script for a new opening taking place in an AA-style meeting. I then started looking for locations that looked the part but would be as cheap as possible. I found a really nice church village hall that I was able to hire out for £90 for 4.5 hours shooting. And now came probably the biggest undertaking of the entire video. I realised that the AA sequence that I'd envisioned would require shape lighting and specific choices to get it done how I had in mind, and of course this meant more planning and more time needed on set. Now we had plenty of time booked at the location, and I really wanted to make sure we got the most out of it. So I met up with Mark and we chatted through the cinematography. I sent him some references and also some shots of the location just so we could start envisioning our options. I then fed images of the actual location into an AI image generator, and then I also put very, very specific prompts until it matched the vision I had in my head, essentially creating a previs that I could show to Mark, demonstrating the feel, the lighting, and how that would look in the actual space we had, just so he could start to plan where the lights would need to be and so on, and also decide what changes he may need to make himself. Generally speaking, I tend to stay away from AI when it comes to creative projects, but in this case I actually found this a helpful tool that actually aided the creative process without taking any of the creative control away from the artists involved. I also then met with the same crew that we'd used before and also got some additional friends who had nothing to do that night and wanted to be involved. We got to the location and started to lay out chairs and set up the lighting. Once we were happy with how everything was looking, we then started to block out the scene. Once everything was worked out and blocked, we then started getting changed into the costumes and applying the clown makeup, and we had a lot of fun with this. We shot all the close-ups first because there were natural skylights at the location and we needed it to be dark to get the wide shots, but for the close-ups we could fake it being nighttime. We directed the action and we had a lot of fun just building up this scene and all collaborating together and working out what would happen when and who would do what. When the sun had finally set, we started to get the wider coverage of the scene, along with some slightly rough DIY dolly shots that we shot on an office desk chair that we were able to find. These ended up having a very rugged handheld feel, but actually we really liked it, so we stuck to the look. We shot for around 3 or 4 hours, getting plenty of coverage to use. This sequence came out really well, and this ended up being the heart of the video. It was so much fun to put together, everyone had a great time and went away with happy memories of the collaboration. I started to realise that I was achieving exactly what I set out to do, which was to go back to how it felt making films when there were no pressures and restraints. We were able to just get together as a group of friends and collaborate on something really fun, but also have it come out looking really strong and really cinematic. I think this really went to illustrate just the power of collaboration and, letting the people around you have as much input as possible and not trying to control everything and do everything yourself. While I feel like there is always a place for having a strong vision and sticking to it, and obviously there are going to be times when you're going to need to say no to certain suggestions, there's a real magic I think that happens when you just allow everyone to be creating simultaneously and bringing their own self to the project. Once we wrapped, I headed home and I started to work all the clips into an edit, assembling a basic cut that actually ended up being, again, pretty close to the final result. What was really fun and rewarding at this point was being able to see the car park shots that we'd shot a long time before the AA shoot, along with the AA footage, and just seeing how well that kind of went together and how consistent it looked. The majority of the video was now done, but we still needed a few gaps filling in the edit. The middle breakdown section and a few clips to add into the car park shots at the end just to give us some more variation. Myself, Simon and Tom went out to a gritty stairway of a shop car park we found, and we spent about half an hour getting some cool slow-mo shots of me running up and down those stairs. We shot much of it with this really cool fisheye lens on a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 4K, but also got some on a tighter lens too. These shots came out well, and once reversed, this had that eerie, creepy effect that I was going for. One of my favourite shots in this little sequence is me running towards the camera in slow motion. This shot was partly inspired by a shot from the great BBC show Ashes to Ashes that I highly recommend to anyone who hasn't seen it. In it, there's a clown character based on David Bowie's Clown in the Ashes to Ashes music video. And when I saw this when I was younger, this shot had a real impact on me, and it just really gave me this very specific feeling that I think really has been dormant in my subconscious, wanting to kind of be recreated and expressed in some of my own work, and this was a really great chance to do that. Now for the shots of the end, I had envisioned a dance with makeup on, and I'd imagined this would be reversed and slowed to match the feel that we had already established in the earlier video, but just adding a bit of contrast and kind of hinting at a romantic aspect to the story. I reached out to a talented dancer and actress who was a mutual friend, and we hired her to perform in the video for a few hours. Myself and Simon found a really cool car park location with trees in the background, but an interior that matched the colour palette of the other car park we had shot at. And so we pinned down a date and got to work shooting. As before, I played the track out of a speaker, and this time Helena, our dancer, started to dance and move to sections we needed. We did this several times in different parts of the car park with different angles until we had enough coverage to use. And then at last, we had everything we needed for a final edit. Post-production for this video ended up being relatively easy, as I'd been editing as I went along, and I'd been kind of slotting it all together already. The hardest part was actually just making the final tweaks and adjustments to the cut, and also just those final adjustments to the grade, just to make sure it all flowed together and worked the way I hoped it would. Thankfully, in this case, no VFX were required for the most part, so the editing process was pretty stress-free. The grade was definitely inspired by, I guess, David Fincher films of the 90s, like Fight Club, which had been one of the references we'd pointed to initially, but I used a very subtle Kodak 238 free print film emulation, and we kept it quite digital and sharp looking, but there were a few shots where I kind of leaned into more 35mm film emulation, specifically the shots of the dancer. I just wanted these to look a bit more gritty, and again with the text at the end I tried to sort of emulate the look of them being printed onto film, just to give it a bit more of an analog edge. So with the video finished, it was now time to look back and reflect on it. This is one of the most enjoyable parts of the process for me, because if you've created from a place of truth, you will often start to learn about yourself and see messages from the subconscious present themselves in form of inner truths that are woven into the creation. When I watch the video back, I see the story of someone who is doing the right things and is in the right places, but somehow fails to connect. He's disenchanted and bored with the structure and sees little point in it. Perhaps he wants to be part of the group, but in the end, knows somehow he's just waiting for the first chance to get out of there. When the group breaks out into chaos, it's like a starter pistol, an external excuse for the internal desire to be flung into the noise once more. Without hesitation, he's up and out. We see him drawn back into this place of chaos. The slow motion and warped movement reminds me of a puppet being pulled forward against his will. Not fighting, but aware that he's being moved along by a force beyond him. He ends up not where he wants to be, but perhaps where he belongs. Confidently introspective as he dreams of lost love and feels the heartbreak that he's left behind him. So what did I learn from this process? While the video ended up being a bit of a collage of noise and a lot of different ideas that all ended up somehow miraculously coming together, the biggest lesson I took away from this process was to lean into what you have and who you have around you. So much of the time when I was younger, I tried to do everything by myself, both out of fear of asking for help, but also pride and ego wanting to have complete control and the credit. I found the moment you really start to make great work is the moment you really start to learn the art of collaboration and trust. I didn't have much money and we didn't have a big crew for this, but what I did have was trust for my collaborators and a good creative and personal relationships that made this process productive and enjoyable, and we ended up with something that I'm very pleased with. Myself and the key creative team worked together extensively and lend help to each other's creative visions, trading time and making art that we all believe in. 10 years ago, when I started out making music videos, making a music video like this for £150 would have been unthinkable. But because we've continued to grow together, believe in and trust in each other, our skills have also grown, but together and not apart. Because I realised that the most valuable thing that we did was to just start when we did. We weren't great when we started out, but we gave the best that we could, and each time we've made something, we've learned and we've grown. And also we've become closer and closer as we share in that process together. The way I see it is you can always be better tomorrow, but what really matters is that you start today. So my advice to anyone watching this video wanting to make their own music video or film and not sure exactly where to start is to start building. Build skills, build experiences, and build a network of collaborators. Because no matter how big the project gets or how many people are on the crew, as long as at the core, the heart of the project is built with people you trust, it has a much better chance. And on reflection, I think it's one of the big reasons that successful directors often work with the same core teams or the same actors over and over. Because nothing can really compare to the experience, the shorthand, and the trust that comes from working that way. You may have a choice between someone who is technically very proficient but you don't quite gel with, and then also someone who you know and trust really well but perhaps is still learning. Of course, the ideal is a blend of the both, but I'd encourage you to lean into the person you trust and to grow with them. So no matter where you are or what you want to achieve, make a start. Make a start and do it with your people. If you don't have people to work with yet, then make a goal of going out and finding them. Find the people that love the films you love, see the world the same way that you do, and agree with what you want to say. You don't have to see eye to eye on everything, but any creative team will be stronger than the sum of its parts alone, so I recommend building it.